Welcome to This Explainer. Let's dive right into the absolutely fascinating and completely unorthodox story of one of the Caribbean's most resilient sporting legends. When we talk about the absolute pantheon of West Indian cricket greats, names like Sir Vivian Richards or Brian Lara instantly spring to mind, right? They conjure up these images of pure flair, explosive boundaries, and just spectacular flamboyance. But today, we're doing something a little different. We're going to explore a man who quietly, relentlessly, and stubbornly carved his name into the history books. Not with some flashy textbook technique, but with sheer, unadulterated grit, unparalleled endurance, and a total dedication to survival at the crease. We're talking about the ultimate unsung warrior of cricket, Shivnarine Chanderpaul.
Okay, so what if I told you one of cricket's all-time greatest run scorers accidentally shot a policeman, possessed a batting stance universally labeled as ugly, and was actually forced into retirement just 86 runs short of a massive national record? I mean, it's a hook that sounds completely made up, doesn't it? But every single word of it is true. This is the story of a man who literally faced down the fastest, most terrifying bowlers in the world with a technique that defied every single coaching manual ever written. He was misunderstood by critics, sometimes totally underappreciated by his own cricket board, yet absolutely feared by his opponents. We're going to unpack all of this today, the unorthodox methods, the towering achievements, and the controversies that shadowed him, to truly grasp the legacy of a man who simply refused to give his wicket away.
Section 1. Entering the international arena. From Unity Village to the world stage.
Born in August of 1974 to a family of Indo-Guyanese descent, his introduction to cricket was, well, anything but gentle. His father, Chemraj, saw his raw talent early on and really took charge of his development. By the time he was just 8 years old, young Shivnarine was already out there facing down much older, much faster bowlers. Imagine being a little child staring down grown men who are hurling a solid leather ball right at you. At that point, it wasn't about scoring beautiful, elegant boundaries. It was quite literally about sheer survival. When you're a kid facing adults on rough, unpredictable dirt pitches, you don't really care about aesthetics. You just worry about not getting hit. And that early exposure to hostile bowling, that laid the absolute foundation for his unbreakable career. It forced him to develop this intense mechanism to watch the ball closely and protect his body and his wicket at all costs. And hey, that survival instinct worked. It saw him rise incredibly fast, captaining the Guyana under-19 team by age 17 and making his first-class debut shortly after that.
Think about the sheer span of this incredible longevity for a second. It stretches over 2 grueling decades of international play. He walked out to bat for the West Indies Test team for the very first time against England over in Georgetown back in March 1994. He was barely 19 years old. And what the spectators didn't know while he was out there calmly scoring 62 runs on his debut was that he was secretly battling a really painful groin injury. It was a secret that basically set the tone for his entire career. Quiet heroism without a single complaint. Later that same year, he made his ODI debut against India. Fast forward over a decade, and we see him adapting to the modern era, making his T20 international debut against New Zealand in 2006. All in all, his international career spanned an astonishing 21 years, right up to his final test match in May 2015.
Section 2. The crab-like batting stance. Defying the coaching manuals.
Okay, so when he started his career, his stance was actually reasonably traditional. But over the years, just to combat the terrifying pace and hostility of international fast bowlers, his feet naturally began to rotate forwards. By the early 2000s, he stood facing the bowler almost entirely square. Honestly, he looked more like a baseball batter than a classic test cricketer. Critics everywhere called it ugly, famously describing it as crab-like. But here's the genius part. By facing the bowler squarely, he unlocked a massive biological advantage: binocular vision. He could see the ball with both eyes, completely unobstructed, right up until the very last millisecond. He completely threw traditional aesthetics out the window because this specific, weird method provided unmatched visual clarity and absolute survival at the crease. And the craziest part? Just a split second before the ball was actually delivered, he would miraculously shuffle back into a more orthodox position to play his shot.
Respected cricket scholar Skyled Barry actually had a brilliant way of capturing the sheer absurdity of this setup to the traditional eye. He joked that the stance was perfectly orthodox, provided the bowler delivered from next to the umpire at square leg rather than from the bowler's end. It's hilarious, but true. Yet behind this peculiar, awkward setup were incredibly soft hands, immense patience, and this uncanny, almost magical ability to deflect the ball exactly where he wanted it. It was self-coaching at its absolute finest. He essentially built a fortress around his stumps that traditional coaching manuals couldn't even begin to comprehend. And let me tell you, even the absolute greatest bowlers in history admitted that breaking his defense was a total nightmare. I mean, when a legendary spinner like Shane Warne says you literally need a crowbar to pry a batter away from the crease, you know you're dealing with a uniquely frustrating opponent. Chanderpaul was like a limpet. He would absorb immense, crushing pressure, take incredibly painful body blows, like that time in 2003 when he batted for hours against Australia with a completely broken finger, and he just refused to leave. He was not out there to entertain the bowlers, right? He was there to break their spirit, ball by exhausting ball.
Section 3. Triumphs and Monumental Records. The Unbreakable Anchor. Now let's talk numbers, because these massive stats absolutely speak for themselves. They prove, without a doubt, that grit and endurance can totally outlast sheer flamboyance. Take a look at those test figures. 164 matches, 11,867 runs at a stellar average of 51.37, including 30 centuries. Get this, he is one of only a handful of players in the entire history of the sport to face more than 25,000 deliveries in Test cricket. And he totally proved his adaptability in the one-day international format too, racking up nearly 8,800 runs. He wasn't just a defensive wall. When the situation called for it, he could seriously accelerate. He went from a player who kind of struggled to convert 50s into 100s early on to becoming the absolute, undisputed backbone of the West Indies. 6,883. Okay, so why is that number important? That is the record-breaking number of test runs he scored batting specifically at the number 5 position. That is the highest aggregate of runs by any player in the history of Test cricket at that specific batting spot. And the number 5 position is notoriously difficult. You're usually walking in right when the top order is totally collapsed, and you're immediately tasked with either rebuilding the entire innings from scratch or desperately shepherding the tail-end bowlers just to scrape together a few runs. And Chanderpaul? He absolutely mastered this exact super high-pressure scenario. Let's just pause for a second to really appreciate these spectacular milestones. Batting for over 1,000 minutes without getting out. That's more than 16 hours at the crease. And he did that 4 separate times. Crazy, right? Yet, he wasn't always a slow scorer. Against a really fierce Australian attack back in 2002, he suddenly unleashed a blazing 69-ball Test century that was the 4th fastest in history at the time. And in 2003, during that historic 418-run chase against Australia and Antigua, which is still the highest successful chase in Test history, he scored 104, playing with that broken finger we mentioned, fiercely protecting the tailenders. Ultimately, his absolute consistency couldn't be ignored, and he was globally recognized as the ICC Cricketer of the Year in 2008, beating out massive names like Dhoni and Ponting. Over time, he completely transformed his initially aggressive style to become the solitary rock of a seriously crumbling batting lineup. As absolute legends like Brian Lara retired and West Indies cricket entered this really transitional, often struggling phase, Chanderpaul was the glue. He didn't seek the limelight, you know? He didn't do dramatic fist pumps or elaborate celebrations. He just gave a humble little nod to the dressing room and immediately got back to the grueling work of facing the next delivery.
Section 4. Controversies and Forced Retirement. The Shadows of a Legend.
Now, as much as he was quiet on the pitch, off the pitch, his life features some incredibly bizarre incidents that we just have to talk about. In 1999, he mistakenly shot a policeman. He genuinely believed the officer was a burglar. It was an honest mistake that didn't result in any charges, but man, it generated massive headlines. Even more remarkably, early in his career, he was cruelly dubbed a hypochondriac because he missed matches so frequently. But that unfair label completely vanished in 2000 when surgeons discovered and removed a literal floating bone from his foot. That single operation instantly transformed his mobility and basically kickstarted his golden era. Then, in 2008, he raised eyebrows everywhere by mysteriously retiring mid-innings during a domestic match. Why? To attend the West Indies Players Association Awards, where he, ironically, swept all the top honors. But perhaps the most contentious chapter of his entire story was his exit. Fast forward to 2015. After a slight dip in form during a series against England, the selection panel, who were looking to inject young talent into the squad, unceremoniously dropped him. And the worst part? He was agonizingly close, literally just 86 runs short, of surpassing Brian Lara to become the most successful Test run scorer in West Indies history. He absolutely did not want to retire. He deeply wanted a proper farewell series against Australia, but the board was completely adamant. Later on, when he asked for a no-objection certificate to go play in the Masters Champions League in Dubai, the board reportedly mandated he officially announce his international retirement just to get the paperwork. He outright called it a forced retirement, creating this really bitter bureaucratic end to 21 years of dedicated service.
And it wasn't just fans who were upset. Even his legendary peers publicly lamented how his monumental career was brought to such a screeching halt. Brian Lara himself expressed deep disappointment that a man who had literally anchored the team for 2 straight decades wasn't given a proper send-off. It highlighted a really severe disconnect between the veteran players and the cricket board's administration, leaving a pretty somber, sour note on what was otherwise a truly glittering resume.
Section 5. 5 Pillars of a Legacy. Summarizing Shivnarine Chanderpaul. So, how do we encapsulate this incredibly unique and complex sporting giant? Let's break it down into 5 key takeaways. First, his completely unorthodox technique forever proved that visual clarity and personal comfort will always trump textbook aesthetics. Second, his unbreakable resilience is just unmatched. I mean, batting over 1,000 minutes 4 separate times is a staggering feat of mental endurance. Third, he is an absolute statistical titan, firmly cemented as a member of the elite 10,000 test run club. Fourth, we unfortunately have to remember his controversial exit, which serves as a stark reminder of the often harsh realities of sports politics. And finally, his lasting inspiration. He showed countless young players everywhere that you can be completely different, heavily scrutinized, and still achieve absolute, undeniable greatness. Throughout his career, he was affectionately known as Tiger, a nickname he adopted from his idol, Rohan Kanhai. And honestly, it fits perfectly. He was truly the quiet warrior, fighting for every single run as if his actual life depended on it. He didn't roar for the cameras. His ferocity was entirely internalized, channeled directly into this impenetrable defense that absolutely exhausted the world's finest athletes. He proved time and time again that greatness sometimes whispers rather than shouts.
So, I'll leave you with this question. When we evaluate the absolute greats of the game, should we measure them by the aesthetic beauty of their swing or by the unbreakable grit of their survival? Think about that the next time you watch a game or dive into a new topic. We are so naturally drawn to flash and style, right? But as Shivnarine Chanderpaul brilliantly illustrates, the ugly, the unorthodox, and the stubbornly persistent methods are very often what build the most enduring legacies in history. Thank you for joining me on this explainer, and remember to keep questioning what true greatness really looks like.